Hello, my name's Jules. Welcome to The Secret Mind. I've got all sorts of ideas for videos for you for hypnosis and medical ideas and various all sorts of other stuff, but it's late. It's been snowing. There's been lots of train delays and cancellations. I've done a lot of travelling. And rather than leave you empty-handed, I've got at least 5 chapters of this book to go, maybe 4. So here we go, it's chapter 15, Every Man an Enemy. You asked for it, you got it. Chapter 15, Every Man an Enemy, by W. Howard Baker. Carla didn't take Blake's advice. She didn't lie down. She couldn't rest not knowing what was going to happen. She couldn't be still. She had to keep moving. She bathed her eyes, and she made up her face again, and very nearly burst into fresh tears when she looked at her pallid, red-eyed reflection in the mirror. "You must control yourself," she said fiercely. She went across her room to the wardrobe and found her coat. She threw it around her shoulders and went downstairs again, intending to go for a walk. She had to get away from this place. She had to think. She must have some fresh air. A constable stopped her in the hall. He was very polite, but he was also firm. "I'm afraid you can't go outside, miss. The inspector's orders were quite definite." Feeling more like a caged beast than ever, Carla returned to her room and paced the floor, puffing jerkily at a cigarette. How could she be calm, not knowing what was going to happen, dreading the future? How could she be calm? Soon John would know the truth. She stubbed out her cigarette with a quick, vicious movement. She went out of her room again, and this time made for a small stairway at the head of the passage. This stairway led up, not down. She had to get some fresh air. She would go out on the roof. The roof of John Bovis's house was flat between 2 gables. There was a low parapet and a leaded walk. As Carla pushed open the creaking door at the head of the stairs, cold air struck her face and brought blood tingling to the surface of her skin. She walked out onto the roof and found the lead slippery. There had been more snow during the night, and it had remained cold all day. She walked carefully across to the parapet. She looked out and down, taking deep lungfuls of air and feeling her taut-strung nerves begin to relax. Out here, under the peaceful sky turning gold inwards towards dusk, her problems lost a little of their magnitude. She leaned forward over the parapet, more calmly now, seeing the country down to Marlow spread out before her, seeing the church and the huddled houses and the bend of the river. She began to think about her relationship with John and what would happen to it when he knew what Blake knew. What would happen? Would he still love her? Would he still want to marry her? She tried to see into the future as below her bare-boughed trees sighed in a freshing wind. And far off, the river shone in the late afternoon light. She didn't know that someone was on the roof with her. That someone had come up the narrow, winding staircase on her heels. She didn't know that she was breathing the same cold air as the murderer of Fawcett and Mackintosh and Lavinia Webb. How could she know? She was deep in her thoughts. And so the murderer came close to her, walking very carefully and making no noise. The roof was slippery, the murderer noted. Good. The parapet Carla was leaning against was very low. Excellent. There could easily be another little accident, the murderer thought. Another little accident, unhappily fatal. Oh yes, indeed. Easily. The mind of this murderer was a curious thing. Warped, some would say. Deranged. But it had not always been so. Once it had been sharp and incisive. It was only recently that it had become unbalanced. Obsession had unbalanced it. Obsession amounting to mania. Obsession with a dream of wealth with expanded daily, 30, 40, 50,000 pounds, and this wasn't the end. Obsession with a dream of money which had accrued and was accruing to the missing author, MacDonald Hall. From the very beginning, almost from the very first day of the post-campaign to find the missing author, the mind of the murderer had been blinded to all reason with thoughts of this wealth. Somehow it had to be acquired. How? The murderer had spent a lot of time puzzling over the problem. The obvious way to get the money seemed to be to put in a claim, but what kind of claim, and where was the evidence to support it? The evidence could be manufactured, the murderer had decided, but would it stand up to investigation? It was then that the Post had announced the names of the other fortune hunters. The murderer had met them. The murderer's mind had assessed their worth. They and their claims alike were valueless. One of them might be true, MacDonald Hall, Fawcett, the man with the 7 o'clock face, perhaps, but the others? The murderer's mind dismissed them, rogues and charlatans all, and not even clever and cunning in their roguery. And then a thought had entered in. An obvious thought, but one that had needed to be placed on record. Rogues and charlatans or not, impostors or honest men, someone must get the money. Who would get it, if not one of the claimants? That was when the murderer's mind had seen a way to acquire this fortune for itself. It had plotted a clear-cut path to wealth and luxury. It wasn't necessary to have a strong, watertight case to support one's claim to the author's title. The murderer's mind didn't know what it had been worrying about. All that was necessary was some reasonable measure of proof, not too obviously manufactured. This, and an absence of competition. The devil's worm had begun to nibble at the murderer's mind. All the other claimants should be killed, or made to disappear, permanently. Fawcett should be the first, for his proof seemed the strongest, and then the others, one by one. It had worked out just like that, and the mind of the murderer had been pleased with itself. Then something quite unforeseen had happened. The murderer had found out almost by accident that Carla Scott was the real MacDonald Hall. That meant only one thing. She would have to go too. And there she was now, leaning over the parapet, invitingly. It was almost as though she wished to go, the murderer thought. He would oblige her. A little pressure, a little sweat, a startled scream perhaps, and she would go to join the others. An accident, of course. What else could it be on a slippery roof in the deepening dusk? The murderer moved forward, and Carla Scott remained unsuspecting. Closer the murderer came, and closer, hands extended, fingers like talons curved to strike. It was at that moment that a furry object intervened. Somehow it came between the murderer's legs. The killer's over-tensed reaction was something which could not be controlled. What was done was regretted immediately, but it was too late then. The murderer lashed out with a foot. The furry object howled. Carla Scott gave a convulsive start. She came up off the parapet fast. She began to swing around. The murderer had to act, and act immediately. See you tomorrow.